small and vigorous, and played off of him rather well, a caring nurse to his more clinical doctor. And when she remembered what it was like to work with the pictures, she would tell a particular story about the early days when the Ohio Assembly was considering an abortion legislation bill, and the Wilkes first volunteers to join the bill's terrifying opponents. They had taken a vacation in Florida, Barbara Wilk recalls. They were giving a public talk as their holiday commenced. Afterward, a doctor approached them and urged them on a small present for their use in their work, a fetus, preserved in formaldehyde and set aside in a plastic bucket. He was well-meaning, Barbara Wilk recalls, and I remember saying, "Oh, you poor little thing," to the baby, and it bothered me the whole week. All I could think was, oh, if somebody had just loved you. It was sad. A perfect little baby. And I decided that if I was going to stay in the movement, I had to develop a thicker skin. Politics and one swift lesson in the shock of the visual thickened up Barbara Wilk's skin. Early in their abortion talks, the Wilks, like Backer and many of the others and their counterparts throughout the states, had begun bringing along the celebrated Leonard Nelson photographs that had appeared in Life magazine in April 1965. The pictures had been hailed around the world as a revelation of the wonder of life's beginning. Taken over 7 years, both inside and outside the uterus, they showed in extraordinary color and detail the week-by-week swelling of the developing human embryo, from the magnified bulge of a blood-filled 4-week heart to a membrane-shrouded face at 28 weeks of pregnancy. Yes, I yield the microphone to you.
My name is Marlene, and I'm also a candidate. Can you hear me now?
Louder.
My name is Marlene, and I'm also a candidate for state representative in District 131, which is in Springfield. The reason I'm here tonight is one of the reasons I'm a candidate. I'm absolutely 100% pro-choice. I've had some experience with abortion. I was a counselor in an abortion clinic in Springfield back in the early 90s. We had two then. We had 2 abortion clinics in Springfield. Now we have none. As always, when you work with people in crisis moments in their lives, there are some you don't ever forget. And there are a few of those people who came through my office that I won't ever forget. I think one of the most memorable was a young woman who was 23 years old. Oh, and that reminds me, do you know what the profile of a woman getting an abortion was at that time? She was a 23-year-old white woman married with 2 children who for some reason could not afford to have another child, whether it was for physical, financial, or social reasons, whatever it was. This woman really fit that profile. She was 23 years old. She had had 1 child when she was 17. And she was in school and could not afford at that time to have another child, so she could come in for an abortion. So I asked her the usual questions that counselors ask people when they come in for an abortion. Is this your idea? Is anyone coercing you? Are you doing this of your free will? Yes, she was. We chatted a little bit about her life and her child. And then I asked another question that I was asked, were you using birth control? Yes, she was. What kind of birth control were you using? Well, she was on the pill. And I said, by any chance, were you taking antibiotics at the time that you became pregnant? She thought about it a little bit and she said, well, yes, as a matter of fact, I was. And I said, were you aware that when you take antibiotics, your birth control pills don't work? And she said, no. And I said, well, I think you need to talk to your doctor about that because he's either incompetent or indifferent. He should have told you that when he gave you the birth control pills. And she looked at me for a minute and she said, well, I will. He's in the waiting room. I think we'll be talking about that on the way home. And you like to have been in the car on the way home? Now, this was a young woman who had a pregnancy fathered by her gynecologist, who could easily have performed this procedure in his office. She wouldn't have had to drive, I think it was 50 or 70 miles, into Springfield and have an abortion. But he didn't. So, yeah, I would like to have been there on the way home. There was another one that I thought was kind of interesting. She was, I would say 30-ish. And she was pregnant, and she was a patient at one of the doctors in St. John's Hospital in Springfield. And on her last visit, the doctor, after the exam, had said, "You can't have this baby," and got up and left the room. So she waited for him to come back. Finally, she got dressed and went out to find a nurse, and the nurse said, "Well, he's seen another patient." And so she went out to the reception desk to pay her bill, and she told the receptionist what had happened. And she said, "Why didn't he come back? I don't know what to do. He said you can't have the baby, but he didn't tell me what to do about it." And the receptionist said, "Well, if you won't tell anyone that I told you this, I'll tell you where you can go. But if you tell anyone I told you, I'll get fired." So she gave her the name of the doctor in another hospital in Springfield, and that doctor referred her to the Women's Community Health Clinic, which is where I work. I find that appalling. This was a doctor entrusted with her health care who was too cowardly to tell her there are 2 abortion clinics in town and that's where you need to go, because he worked for a hospital that would have been upset had he given a patient that information. She had some physical problems, and the baby that she was going to have had some physical problems, and that's why he told her, "You can't have that baby." But he didn't tell her what to do with it. And I guess the one, and this is sort of a classic tearjerker, a social worker came in with an 11-year-old girl, and she was pregnant. And the reason the social worker brought her in was because the father of the girl was the father of the baby, and so the court had taken over, and the social worker brought her in. Now, do you really think that it would have been a good idea to terrorize that child for 3 more days so that she could think about what she had in front of her? I don't think so. I don't even think. I understand there's a bill in that there should be 3 or 4 notarized affidavits for a minor getting an abortion. Why would the social worker have to spend so much time getting notarized affidavits that she was the guardian of this child, so the doctor did not? Those things are already in law and always have been. So this child came in, got her abortion, and went home. And let me tell you, there are no abortions without tears. People don't, on a whim, decide to go have an abortion. It is an extremely difficult thing to do. It isn't a matter of whether you think abortion is right or wrong. It's just a hard thing to do. Sometimes those tears are tears of relief that it's over. Sometimes they're tears of grief. I've had women who were giving up a pregnancy that they really wanted. There was one who had been on vacation without her husband, got where she shouldn't have been, doing what she shouldn't have done. And I said, well, can't you work this out? And she said, no, my husband is sterile. People know this is not his child. And I said, well, what about, could you talk to him about it? Tell him what happened. She said, no, he would never get over that. So this woman who wanted a baby so bad gave it up for the marriage. And these stories go on and on and on and endlessly on there. We used to say at the clinic there were 3 reasons for abortion: rape, incest, and my case. And that's true. We had the right to refuse an abortion to anyone as a counselor that we felt that it would be detrimental to them to get an abortion. And there were times when I really wanted to do that. I never did.
My name is Emily Mary, and I'm here representing women all across the state who are concerned about not only their physical health, but also their rights as a human being. He was well-meaning, Barbara looked called, and I remember saying, "Oh, you poor little thing," to the baby, and it bothered me the whole week. All I could think of was, oh, if somebody had just loved you. It was sad, a perfect little baby. And I decided that if I was going to stay in the movement, I had to develop a thicker skin. Politics and one swift lesson in the shock of the visual thickened up Barbara Wilkes' skin. Early in their abortion talks, the Wilkes, like Tucker and many of their counterparts around the state, had begun bringing along the celebrated Lamar Nilsson photograph that had appeared in Life magazine in April 1965. The pictures had been hailed around the world as a revelation of the wonder of life's beginnings. Taken over 7 years, both inside and outside the uterus, they showed in extraordinary color and detail the week-by-week swelling of the development human embryo from the magnified bulge of a blood-filled four-week heart to the membrane-shrouded face and 28 weeks of pregnancy. That society could know this about human life and still approve abortion, could gaze directly at the week-by-week creation of a living human person and exclaim over its beauty, and still open the door to anyone who wished to kill in an operating room a life at exactly the same stage of its growth. This was a mystery to the Wilkes, and they were adept at conveying in lecture halls their own sense of horror and sorrow. When Barbara Wilkes held up the Nilsson pictures before the audience, she could feel a visceral reaction in the room. The magazine cover shot, the most famous of the series, showed a shimmering amniotic stack, floating out something that Barbara Wilkes imagined that anybody would have called a baby unless they intended to get rid of it. It was 18 weeks along, 6 weeks short of the New York cutoff date. All a person had to do was call it a fetus. It was legal to get rid of it. Once the laws began to change, it was legal to cut a woman's uterus open and remove the baby before it could survive on its own, which was the method for the operation called hysterectomy, or to inject a woman's uterus with a strong saline solution and wait for her to go into labor, which was the preferred method for abortions in the second trimester. Expel the fetus was the technical term for what happened after a saline infusion, as though sufficiently chilly terminology would distract attention from the act itself, as though any woman grieving her way through a spontaneous miscarriage would be told she was losing her fetus. The word fetus began to make Barbara Wilkes feel sick when she heard it. There was a kind of insistence to the way the abortion people clung to that word. Repeat it often enough, and it's not a baby anymore. It's just a tumor or a kidney or some other body part you can toss in a bucket after you snipped it out and handed him the picture at a meeting in California and told him the feet showed development at 10 weeks. Because they were perfect feet, they suggested to the human imagination a perfect body, a person minutely proportioned but exquisitely made from top to bottom. And it was also apparent to Jack that women had some mysterious fascination with babies' feet. When the books began sending their copies of their earliest slide collection, which was to become the single most popular visual teaching tool for right-to-left organizers around the country, they made certain that tiny feet was among the pictures. The embryos were included too, and photographs of living babies who had been born prematurely. You want to teach them before you shock them, Wilkes urged other speakers. Let them understand step by step what is genuinely at stake. The written suggestions were explicit. In our presentation, we would show the 18-week Life magazine cover and ask, is this being human? Subsequently, we will show very human-looking babies at 16, 14, 12, and 11 weeks. In each case, we repeat the question, is this one human? Backing gently down this age ladder, we would hope to lead our audience down with us, never giving them any visual or intellectual reason for changing the initial mindset they started with. It's a baby. By 11 weeks, if due to size alone, some will begin to question. So we stop at that point and discuss in some detail the perfection at 11 weeks. We will detail all the functions of breathing, swallowing, urinating, tasting, sensitivity to pain, capability of learning, etc. Hopefully, this will reaffirm in those who were still wavering a firm conviction that this is still human life. The next photo shows the very, very tiny human feet at 10 weeks. The next drop to 8 weeks, noting that this little one doesn't look quite so human anymore. At this point, we will challenge our audience to enter the scientific age and to extend their eyes with the microscope and their perception with instruments of precision. We will then show them one more visual at 6 weeks, and then we'll show no visuals under 6 weeks. We will not show visuals under 6 weeks because we feel that if we do, the audience may change their minds from their conviction that this is human life. Not that this would make any sense, as the biologic facts and intellectual facts compel us to judge for humanity right down to conception. A viewing audience, however, is not always that rational, and some will make a visual judgment even though we ask them not to. When that lesson in human development was complete, the Wilkes advised any speaker using their slides should proceed directly to the war pictures. That was what they called them in private. In the written guideline, pictures of aborted babies was a more careful phrase. And as the Cincinnati Right to Life office began mailing the Wilkes side to addresses all over the country, Wilkes were very firm in their view that the war pictures must always be part of the presentation. If this be shock, so be it, they wrote. The pictures at SICK were also shock, but taught us something about war that words never could. These pictures are powerful, but they're absolutely authentic, and unless you tell this part of the story, you have only half the story. We therefore feel strongly that pictures of aborted babies should always be used. The dynamic thing to do with aborted babies is to start at the youngest age, in contradiction to telling the story of life as above where we start with live-born babies. The reason we start at 10 weeks level is that there are a least ghastly, a very upsetting set of pictures. One can often feel the growing tension in an audience as we move up the ladder of age from the scraps of arms and legs to the final terribly upsetting cut the cord, drop the baby in the bucket, and let her die. It is important here again that pictures of fresh specimens be used, such as the 10-week section scraps of torn away arms and legs in the 2 sets mentioned above. It is equally important here not to use pickled specimens of limbs because of their whitened, blackened, shrunken, and less human-looking appearance. In describing the types of abortion, we would suggest that you stay fairly close to a simple clinical description of what goes on. We believe that too much added editorialism or motion-tugging comments are not needed as the facts and pictures speak powerfully enough for themselves. We would progress then at the age ladder from section to D and C to salt to hysterotomy and cap it with a full garbage bag of tiny corpses. The garbage bag shot was the Wilkes slide answer to the bucket shot. Stark, black and white, sweeping in its message, Wilkes said that the picture had come from what they called the undeveloped roll. A single roll of film mailed them by the Winnipeg doctor to career conscious to risk public identification. And when they saw the film's pictures and chose the one shot that was the climax of their slideshow, Wilkes composed the label that was always to serve as the caption. The result of one morning's work at a Canadian teaching hospital. The garbage bag shot worked like the dog concentration camp photos from 1945. Babies upon babies, apparently ready for disposal, piled into what appeared to be large plastic-lined trash cans. In the picture, the infants looked nearly the size of newborns. A hospital producing that many smooth-fleshed late-term abortion babies in a single morning would have to have been doing a remarkably brisk business in his surroundings. It was a death picture without visible dismemberment or blood, so it would make people angry and sick without actually making them queasy. And over the years, it was to be reprinted hundreds of thousands of times in books and flyers and slideshows and teaching collections. As propaganda, there was extraordinary resilience to the garbage can shot, but Matt Backer was appalled by it. He thought it pushed a long way past the limits of acceptable taste. Even if the trash bag was real, there seemed to Backer something sordid about this kind of imagery. And anyway, late-term abortion was still a rare enough practice that Backer had misgivings about making extensive use of those photos in his own presentations. The shock factor made him uncomfortable, and when he selected his visual lineup, he made sure that in his pictures the DNC cut body parts were laid out above a 6-inch ruler so that no one could mistake their actual size. Backer ignored the book's admonition about visuals before 6 weeks. One of Backer's pictures showed a pale, bulging column that he would tell other people the human neural tube 2 to 3 weeks after conception. He had graphs too, slides that showed nothing but numbers and thin black lines going up or down. Maybe this show didn't jolt people out of their chairs quite as sharply as the one of the Wilkes talks. But Backer didn't fly from one city to another, presenting himself as a lecturer either. He was a St. Louis quite a busy one at that. And if he was going to talk to people about the subjects he intended to do in language that suited him. Abortion destroys a normal human life, Matt Backer would say. The child is not the unjust aggressor, he would say. I don't think we should institutionalize a system in which we have to take a physical every morning to stay alive, Matt Backer would say, which was his way of squatting back the evidence, the audience members, and debate opponents who wanted to abort children like his own retarded son. He was not an especially polished public speaker, but he was calm and hard to ruffle, and he learned to sense, as if by instinct, when someone in the audience was going to raise a hand and start in on the church. Isn't it a fact? They were always grouped, these questions, and usually phrased in the manner of a withering attorney in cross-examination. Isn't it a fact that Catholicism condemns abortion? Isn't it a fact that you yourself are Catholic? Isn't it a fact that Catholics are most of the membership of groups that call themselves Right to Life? Isn't this whole issue simply a case of one religious group imposing its view on all the rest of us? And Dr. would wait, his face impassive, his hands on the lectern. For always, there was that final Catholic question, the dismissive question, the one without which the others had no point. And Dr. would nod and know that he was not supposed to look angry or even faintly irritated, and answer the question in order one by one. Yes, 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 no. This was true. The Roman Catholic Church, the church in which Matthias H. Baker, Jr., had been baptized and confirmed and formally educated from kindergarten through his final year of medical school, instructed its parishioners that abortion was mortal sin, an unspeakable crime. In the 1965 language of the Second Vatican Council, which used the word abortion as though it were half of a hyphenated phrase, grammatically and philosophically inseparable from the word infanticide. Life must be protected with the utmost care from the moment of conception. Abortion and infanticide are abominable crimes, the Council's pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world. The original document was printed in Latin, and the adjective describing the crimes infada varies from one English translation to another: abominable, nefarious, horrible, unspeakable. And this, indisputably, was also true. From the earliest years of the model penal code abortion proposals, it was Catholics who had taken up the opposition, who drove to the state houses and stood before lecture audiences to plead the cases for abortion as a legal and social wrong. Dennis Kavanagh was Catholic. The Wilkes were Catholic. The founder of Missourians opposed to the liberalization of abortion laws was Catholic, and the pathologist William Drake was Catholic, and William Hogan, and Mary Lynn, who sent the Wilkes some of their first slides, was Catholic. The head of New York Right to Life was Catholic. The head of Right to Life of Southern California was Catholic. The leading testimony against Colorado's 1967 Model Penal Code law had come from the Catholic Lawyers Guild and the Colorado Catholic Conference. A Catholic lawyer had a voice for the unborn. The Washington State group formed to fight the 1970 abortion law. A Catholic research physician had the Value of Life Committee. The Boston-based group formed to fend off challenges in the Massachusetts abortion law. A Catholic cardiologist and Catholic attorney helped set up the Illinois Right to Life, the National Right to Life Committee. In the earliest years, not much more than a two-man effort to staff an office in Washington, D.C., was headquartered inside the United States Catholic Conference building in the Capitol. The director was a priest, James McHugh, and the first National Right to Life Conference in January 1971 took place in Chicago Catholic College, named after a French saint. Everybody cultivated exceptions. The person who could be pointed to with some indignation when the subject came up. In Chicago, there was Victor Rosenblatt, a Jewish law professor who helped found the legal organization called Americans United for Life. In Arizona, there was Carolyn Gerster, an internist who had been raised without religious training and was attending church by the time she began testifying against changes to the state abortion law. There were Lutherans working in the Minnesota group and a Methodist doing public speaking for the Massachusetts group. The governor of Alaska was a Methodist too, and had vetoed his state's permissive abortion bill before the legislature overrode him. At these points of information were known, in the gradually overlapping circles of state right to life organizations, was a measure of the nature of the problem. When Carolyn Gerster was recruited into action in 1970 in Arizona, the surgeon who contacted her expressed his alarm about possible changes in the state abortion law and added, as Gerster recalls, "You're a Protestant, and we're trying to be sure we have 50% non-Catholic." Victor Rosenblatt once fended off a newspaperman who said, with evident bewilderment, "Rosenblatt, that's not a Catholic name. Mind telling me your wife's maiden name?" Her name had been Rand, Rosenblatt said, and the newsman nodded. "Oh, Ryan, that explains it." "Actually, no," Rosenblatt said, now beginning to be angry. "It was Rand, shortened from Ranovsky. The Catholic label lay over all of them, and within a logic that men like Matt Backer found maddening to try to penetrate. If your church teaches that a law must not permit abortion, and you believe that the law must not permit abortion, then by definition you are mouthing the teachings of your church. And if you are mouthing the teachings of the church," here was the logic Backer could see at his reasoned conclusion, "then you have no business interfering in the secular matters of government. The National Association for Repeal of Abortion Laws had from its first months of organization been describing regional right to life groups as clumsily disguised arms of Roman Catholic Church. In the 1970 annual NARL aimed directly at the church, exposed the tax-deductible lobbying efforts of Catholics. The secretary wrote, "Point out the fact that hospitals refusing to sterilize people or perform abortions are practicing religion on public tax money. Practicing religion. Plainly, that was the essence of it. That every time Dr. Matthias Backer drove down to Jefferson City and talked about the incidents of rebellion damage or due process for the unborn, he was, like his Catholic counterparts around the states, practicing religion, dispatched by the Pope, as it were. Was it practicing religion when he gave money to charity, or volunteered his medical services at the local clinic? His church taught the deep importance of charity in community too. Thou shalt not kill was a basic teaching. In the teachings of the Catholic Church, it was a practicing religion. It was a practicing religion when Matt Backer refrained from shooting people. Was it a practicing religion when Matt Backer refrained from shooting people in the street? Just because my church teaches it doesn't make it a religious teaching. In legislative hearings and debate halls all over the country, Matt Backer and many of his Catholic colleagues tried over and over to make people see the principle they were defending. The sanctity of human life was not a Catholic principle, but an ethical principle, a moral bedrock solid under all of us. This conviction that a church can champion a moral principle so universal that it ought to apply to people of any faith or philosophy was the most profoundly important driving force for the gathering American movement that called itself Right to Life. In the mouths of their opponents, it was made to sound like nonsense. Roomfuls of Catholics, letterheads full of Catholics, all of them insisting they are not promoting a Catholic idea, but it was true. That was what they insisted. In another decade, religious people would join the campaigns against abortion with unabashed reliance on ministers' teachings and readings of Scripture. But in the years before 1973, when the groundwork was being laid, men and women who built Right to Life organizations in cities all over the country described themselves the same way Matt Backer did. Born to Catholicism, raised in Catholicism, and guided to Right to Life by the plainest possible intersection of medical science and common moral sense. Backer has learned these things in Catholic school, both medical science, as he would understand and practice it, and common moral sense. He learned long division in Catholic school too, and the proper use of pronouns in the history of the American Revolution. When he thought about it afterward, it seemed to Backer that there was not very much that he hadn't learned as a Catholic. Being Catholic was a big part of him as a Missourian. It was what he was born to, who he was. And when he surveyed the terrain of his childhood neighborhood, the parish of St. Anthony and Missouri, wished to identify.
My name is Phyllis Spencer. I'm from Springfield, Missouri. I am here because I am protesting the proposed legislation requiring an extra 3-day wait for an abortion. He lived in South St. Louis, that most thickly Catholic neighborhood in a city already full of Catholic men and women. They joked about the stamp in St. Louis, getting to know you greeting. What parish are you from? Certainly there were Protestants and there were Jews who had settled down to the general locations in St. Louis since the mid-1800s, and the city and the population swelled rapidly with the arrival of immigrants from Europe and workers and freed slaves from the South. But the city was founded by the French Catholic traders. The first schools and universities were Catholic, and many of the immigrants were European and German. Catholics like Baker's grandparents, scrubby Dutch in the parlance of the town, supposedly a reference to the diligent wives out washing their white linen and their front steps as they cleaned once a week. Baker's mother was not out front every week, but as a boy he understood that he was a purebred scrubby Dutch. All four of his grandparents had immigrated from northern Germany, and Becker's parents still broke into German sometimes when they wanted to talk over the children's heads. His father was a real estate and an insurance salesman, and a general man with modest ambitions. His mother had worked as a seamstress once, but had stayed home with the children when Matt was a boy. Their street was plain and straight and narrow, brick houses lined in small patches of grass in the front and back. And Becker knew the religion of each of the neighbor family as Sunday came, and as they knew their last names and which church they attended. Streeter had attracted more from the non-Catholics than was common around St. Louis, and on Saturdays Matt would watch as the crowd formed around St. Anthony's on the weekend, and he I give you permission.
My name is Grace Novak Wilson, and I'm from Rogersville, Missouri. Thacker was good at it. He could rattle off the syllables one after another while he stood under the shower, or between panting breaths while he was running up and down the street to church 50 years later. When he was a grandfather, he would still be able to repeat without prompting the Latin Confiteor Deo Omnipotenti. I confess to the Almighty God in a parochial school he learned the words and instructions that accompanied them the way the school meetings did. In religion class, the first class of the day, the Sisters of St. Joseph taught in their long black habits, and once a week had a priest came in to lecture and answer their questions. They had begun with the Baltimore Catechism, the beginnings of religion class, lesson 1. The purpose of man's existence. Who made you? God made me. Did God make all things? Yes, God made all things. Why did God make you? God made me to show his goodness and to make me happy with him in heaven. Matt Becker made his first communion when he was 7 years old. His hair slicked back and his shoes shined black. And throughout his boyhood, the nuns and the priests in the immediate world around him taught him the lessons as an observant Catholic boy. A Catholic boy did not eat on Fridays. A Catholic boy examined his conscience before making a confession to the priest. A Catholic boy raised his hat when passing a Catholic church and bowed his head reverently when the sacred name of Jesus was mentioned, and Junior planted in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, the body and blood of Christ, and a bread and wine at the altar. Sometimes Matt managed his obligations, and sometimes he did not. But by the time he was in high school, he understood that these were church rules, Catholic rules, duties imposed on him. His neighbors, the Lutheran sign painter next door and the Baptist minister up the street, lived by different sets of rules. His neighbors were permitted to eat meat on Fridays. If he had been interrogated about it, Matt Becker supposed he would have said it was such a pity that his neighbors were forsaking the comfort and salvation of the church. But there was no proselytizing in Becker's immediate world. The neighbors had their own religion, and nobody in Becker's house was going to march next door and insist that God meant the sign painter's family into eating fish or praying in Latin, or otherwise attending the intricacies of what Matt had been taught all his life were the laws of the Catholic Church. But Matt Becker had also been taught that there were other laws too, broader laws, the laws of human decency, universally recognized laws of God. At St. Louis University High School, the Jesuits taught their students ethics, honor, codes of conduct, principles meant for any moral man, as I understood it. In his first year of high school, one of his teachers began the term by announcing that at the top of every paper, each student was to write out one definition from the teacher's code of conduct, which was written out and passed around the class to ensure that it be properly understood. Integrity, loyalty, enthusiasm, honesty, manliness, and flourish. For the rest of his life, Thacker would remember the categories. Remember the definition of integrity included the words making decisions based on principle. The notion was not Catholic integrity, but human integrity. And taught in Catholic schools, some of the strongest principles to be upheld were taught not as religion, but as ethics. The study of right and wrong in human conduct also required force. One of the most basic of human rights is the claim to life. This is not a positive, but a natural right. It is not granted by any state or society, but flows from the nature of a free being whose entitled means necessary to work for the attainment of his ultimate end. Life is the most fundamental nature means to this end. Ultimately, this man has come from God, as does everything else this man has. This paragraph, under the heading, The Right to Life, introduced the 11th chapter in the ethics textbook written by Vernon J. Ford, a philosophy professor at St. Louis University during the 1940s, when Matt Thacker was an undergraduate. By the time the book was published, Thacker had already left St. Louis University to enlist in the Navy, but it was based on his already taught ethics courses, and almost certainly reflects the tenor of discussion that would have swirled around young Catholic college students like Matt. These are complex arguments, drawing not on scripture, but on the kind of point-by-point reasoning used by St. Thomas Aquinas, the greatest theologian in the history of the Church. The chapter subheading suggested in the wake of the debate, is it unjust to kill an innocent man? Is it wrong to kill an unjust aggressor? Is capital punishment justifiable morally? Is it just to kill an unborn child? Classroom argument and many long-written treatises offered lengthy responses to questions like these, but in the textbook they were dispensed with efficiency. It is always wrong to knowingly kill an innocent man because every person has a right to life, and others have a duty to do everything morally possible to promote that right. It may be moral to kill an unjust aggressor because of this right of self-defense as part of the right to life, but one must be certain that no other less serious means of defense will suffice. Capital punishment is morally justifiable, as it is justifiable to remove the seized part of the human body when a criminal has seriously offended the common good of the community. It is always wrong to kill an unborn child because the child is an innocent person and thus, by definition, cannot be thought of as an unjust aggressor. The word abortion appeared only 3 times in Vernon Ford's textbook, and if it was uttered aloud in Matt Thacker's classrooms, it sailed right past him. The United States had entered World War II, and the arguments were about more pressing matters: the definition of just war, the protection of adult human life, the rational defense of one's own religious and philosophical beliefs. Long ethical discussions have really never held Becker's interest anyway. He was a focused student, impatient to graduate and get on with his work. And it was not until his last years of medical school that he was forced to think seriously about the elaborate but rigid moral lessons of the men who had taught him and written in his textbook. Direct killing of innocent human life is never permissible. That was one of the essential guiding principles for Catholic obstetrician, with its special reference to innocence of life, a life blessed by God, as all human lives are blessed by God, but still too new to have committed any offense in this world. And as a young physician, understanding the guiding principles but still working at how to apply them, Becker sometimes felt himself pulled between conscience and instinct as he worried about what to do for the woman in his care. A patient had cancer of the cervix when Becker was in residence, but she was 3 months pregnant. Becker saw the hospital priest. What were his options? The cancer was confined to a single site, and a hysterectomy would probably get it all out. But it wasn't hysterectomy a direct killing of her unborn child? The priest urged Thacker to explore every possible alternative, but Thacker was as certain as a resident could be. Without the operation, she would die, leaving her other children motherless. The verdict from both priest and Thacker's department chairman performed a hysterectomy and baptized the semi-formed baby. Double effect was invoked. The principle taught in philosophy classes and immediately applicable here. A person may in good conscience commit a moral evil if it is the unavoidable byproduct of committing a moral right. The person must not intend the moral evil. That was important to the double effect. And the reasons for taking the perilous route must be propounded deep. They were difficult discussions, but for the rest of his life, Thacker would have no trouble remembering what they were about, and more significantly, what they were not about. They were not about the woman. They were not about what the woman was carrying inside her uterus. Thacker knew that she was carrying inside her uterus, just as the priest knew it, and the department chairman knew it, and everyone else appeared to know it. Amid the surroundings in which Matt Thacker had come of age, she was carrying a baby, a second human life, and when Thacker did the hysterectomy, it was the principle of double effect that informed him in the operating room. The direct act that he had performed was the removal of the diseased organ. The unintended byproduct, the moral evil made unavoidable by this life-saving operation, was the killing of an unborn child. Where had he learned this? Where had he not learned it? Thacker had taken human biology during his first year of college. The classes were held in an old laboratory and lecture room deep inside the basic sciences building. And there, Father Carroll made his students see that human biology was a wondrous thing. The egg and the sperm, the moment of fertilization, cells dividing one after another, the small arrest of life suspended mutely inside lined-up shelves of jars of colored iced tea. This was not an atmosphere in which a professor of science might stroke his chin and say, "Well, life begins at conception, but what do we really mean by life? Look at the pictures." Thacker would want to cry later on, when the unfriendly men and women in his lecture audiences would start in on the deep uncertainties of life's beginnings. You can see it there, the egg and the sperm. They join. It begins. It would always seem to Thacker that if there was a singular venue for the source of his understanding about the nature of uterine life, it must have been that classroom. He thought himself an ordinary Catholic, praying respectable, if not particularly scholarly attention to the teachings of his faith. He knew that from some of his Catholic journals that the Church itself had, over the centuries, demonstrated some of the confusion as to the stage of pregnancy in which abortion ought to be considered the equivalent of death. The first authoritative collections of canon law, compiled during the 12th and 13th centuries, find abortion as a homicide only after the fetus had been animated, or fused with the soul. The point of this consolement took place after the subject of the philosophical debate for the centuries before that. Many early theologians were influenced by the Aristotelian view that the embryo's soul progressed through the various stages of development before acquiring the divine nature that distinguished it as a human. And well into the 1800s, most people agreed to address the subject repeated that the principle that although abortion was always a moral wrong, it was sin less grave than to murder if it was performed before the fetus had been animated. It was not until 1869, during the papacy of Pius X, that the official church doctrine was changed permanently to the teaching of Matt Thacker had absorbed as a young Catholic man, that abortion must be regarded as murder regardless of the stage of pregnancy at which it occurs. Since the scientific understanding of human conception advanced so dramatically during the 19th century, the mammalian ovum was first identified in 1827, and the fertilization of egg by sperm had first observed microscopically and accurately explained during the second half of the century. The church's evolving position seemed to Thacker both sensible and enlightened. Further confirmation that life begins at conception was the declaration not of religious faith, but rather of the demonstrable science he had learned in Father Carroll's biology. 4 times a year, Thacker received a subscription of the Catholic Physician's Ethical Journal, Linacre orders. An invitation from Linacre, from conception on, resonated between the lines as kind of the first principle. The starting point so universally understood that there was no need to waste ink articulating it. How to act upon this principle as a Catholic physician and an ethical human being, that Linacare's theologians and medical writers addressed with vigor. Was it acceptable for a Catholic doctor to abort an unborn child in order to save his child's critically ill mother? No, Linacre reported. It was not. The doctor's duty was to do all that he could to save both patients without a direct moral assault on either. Was it permissible to rescue a woman from ectoscopic pregnancy, the accidental implanting of a fertilized egg inside the fallopian tube? Yes. One Linacre article advised, but only with scrupulous care, and a ruptured tube was potentially fatal if an ectoscopic pregnancy was left alone. And Linacre instructed that the tube could be removed with the pregnancy inside. And this was the excising of a diseased organ. A moral act with unfortunate side effects. But it was still not permissible to make an incision and pull the pregnancy from a still unruptured tube, even if the doctor's intent was to save the tube so the woman might more easily become pregnant again. That was a direct assault upon the living and viable fetus and intended destruction of innocent